Hello, everyone. I'm Ken, and today with my friend Kev, I'm going to be discussing the legitimacy of the Pinnacle of Combat skins. Say hi, Kev.
What's up, everyone? My name's Kev.
He has a YouTube channel, by the way. Don't forget to check that out for him.
Yeah, I got a YouTube. It's kind of
It's
dead,
kind of
but
sad that I have to promote the YouTube channel for him because he's too shy. But
yeah.
So, as I said already, we're going to discuss some scans that have been floating around the community for quite a while right now. And people on TikTok, Discord, among other platforms of the media, seem to be really convinced that the scans are legitimate. But I'm not so convinced. So, Kev, what are some of the things that we're going to discuss about the scans that might seem really crystal clear to some people, but to us might not seem so legitimate? What do we have to say?
All right. Thanks for passing it on to me. My baby daddy. Anyway, basically, just looking at these scans, they look like normal scans, I guess, for Devil May Cry. They apparently have like some conceptual scaling, ninth dimensional stuff, even immeasurable speed, etc. But there's just a lot to go over here, man. So just like one basic thing to point out. We have these if we compare the ninth dimensional stuff, for example, and even the immeasurable speed scan, we have this long line of text, right? All these line of text, like 5 to 6, 7 lines of Japanese wording or Chinese wording, whatever the fuck, right? And then we have the ones that we could actually verify within the game, and which are 2 to 3 sentences long or lines long or whatever. It's already kind of suspicious. And the ones with the really high end scaling for Devil May Cry, they seem to not be verifiable within the game itself.
So from the get-go, we can see a lot of inconsistencies coming from those scans, which is not a good sign whatsoever. For one, the lines of text are completely shorter on the ones that are verifiable. The ones that are non-verifiable, or the ones that are being claimed to be legitimate, like the ninth dimensional or immeasurable speed stuff, have complete long lines of text that don't even seem to align very well with the consistency of the lines of text, which is around 2 lines of text at most. But the ones that really wank or really seem to give a high-end interpretation of the verse power seem to be to 4 to 5, at some points even 6 lines of text, which in a consistent standpoint doesn't really line up whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that is really hard to go past by is the fact that some of the scans, especially the immeasurable speed one, you can clearly see that the text is formatted in a very different way. But what I mean by this is that you can clearly measure the distance the text is from the background image. In the immeasurable speed ones, we can clearly see that the line of text is way more compacted or way smaller than the consistency or pool of consistency that comes from the original scans, or the ones that can be found within the game, which should already give you some signs that these scans have to be put under certain scrutiny. Otherwise, it wouldn't be really genuine.
We're not trying to cherry pick or anything. We're just giving all this information out just because it's really really hard to verify these scans in the game. And when we actually try to look for them, we have an entire crew of people, our friends and everything, getting the games. We have to literally go and change our settings into China settings or whatever for the Play Store, Google Play, whatever we use, just to download the game and try to look for these scans, right? So, and we happen to never see these scans, and we only see the ones that are appearing on screen, which are a lot shorter and a lot shorter lines of text or whatever, while the other ones are just they're just not verifiable. So this is why we're even pointing this out in the first place. We're not trying to cherry pick at all. It's just really suspect to the least.
Yeah. And another thing that should really raise some red flags for you guys is the fact that if you really boil it down and really go to compare the text and what it's actually saying, you will notice a very particular pattern repeats with the scans that are verifiable, and then the ones that are just giving this high interpretation of the verse. You'll see that the ones that are verifiable are under tips. Of course, all the scans are supposed to be tips, but the verifiable ones, the ones with the shorter lines of text, do give some context or some form of help for the player to help them advance in the game, or you just give some general details, nothing too complex, some general idea about the game. Like, for example, one would like say, you are like in this area of the game, this place is haunted, or give you some really general lore of the game, nothing too complex, or straight up just tell you how to beat a boss or how to do better, perform better in a certain boss fight, if anything.
Yeah.
But if you go to the Immeasurable speed scan or the 9th-dimensional soul scans, and all these scans that are really long length, all these scans that are really weirdly formatted, and you will notice that they're hyper specific with everything they say. Oh, comes from a 9th-dimensional eightfold path in the 9th dimension and returns to the Buddhism. Like, I'm exaggerating it, but you get what I'm saying. They're being hyper specific when there's a preponderance of evidence with the other scans that are actually verifiable, that you shows that these are actual game tips. The scans that actually just wank the verse are nothing similar to game tips whatsoever, and that should really raise some flags for you guys. So now that we have posited the potential of the scans being more than likely fake, I'd like to go over some arguments that some people would like to propose in defense of these scans at this point. So let's imagine that all the evidence that we proposed so far is not actually evidence, or that we haven't proposed any kind of evidence. And let's say that I'm just like opening it with a skeptical argument, saying that, or just being doubtful about the scans in general, saying like, okay, what is the evidence to say that they're real? You're asserting that the scans are real because you're posting them as evidence to suggest that Dante is of a certain level, therefore you have to be asserting that the scans are real. So a lot of people, unknowingly, would try to respond to this by saying like, okay, I just already showed the scan. I already showed that the scan exists. So what is the evidence that the scan is fake? So this is not only shifting the burden of proof, because you're trying to assert that until I prove that it is fake, I have to prove that it is fake for it to like be validated. You're also making an appeal to ignorance at that point, which is basically asserting the negation is true when the positive is like is not proven, or vice versa, asserting the positive is correct or true when the negation is not proven. Both cases fall under an appeal to ignorance. Both cases are just fallacious, because anything that can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. The same goes with the scans. If you assert that the scans are in the game, then I will expect you to at least be able to provide evidence that the scans do exist within the game. And with the reasoning that I already provided for why the scans are fishy to begin with, I am within the right to do so. So most people would try to avoid this, saying that it's ratty, whatever, but at the end of the day, we already posited like the evidence to suggest that the scans are not real, or that they are fishy at the very least. It seems to me that it's very reasonable within the situation.
So people might bring up the fact that there's different builds of the games, right? And they often just say, or at least a few like people who acknowledge these builds exist of Pinnacle of Combat, they often say that the formatting actually like displays the scans differently rather than like the ones we see on screen here. So basically the argument is just that their display of format of the scans are a lot different than the ones that we display, therefore we can't see them. Or maybe they just show like these scans while we're not like using these builds. Yeah, for one, there's just a burden of proof on them to even prove like the builds even like change much. But even by that, like even if we look for like different builds, we see them, you can see them on YouTube, like they're not different at all. Like they don't really show anything different of display of the scans or whatever. They at most they just show like a kind of off screen, like you kind of see like another layer of a black screen behind the scan itself at most. So it's not even a change at all. And like the scans of course they don't really appear on the game either way, even if you use the builds or not. So again, they're still not verifiable. You can't even prove like the builds they use, if they even change anything at all.
Now, I'd like to take you guys to a little hypothetical. Let's say, for the sake of the argument, that the scans are actually real, that the scans are actually usable, quantifiable within the game, and all of the points we pointed out are not valid, and the scans actually exist. So even if it was the case, some people might be compelled to actually analyze the scans now and actually like come up with some really detrimental interpretation to this ninth dimensional immeasurable speed wankers. But I will try to elaborate on these interpretations because I think it's really important for this case specifically. So starting with the ninth dimensional scan. Firstly, this tip is talking about souls. Souls are fairly accepted, considered to be a non-physical entity within a body. And that's usually how they're defined. And the scan itself is also talking about memories, non-physical things, which pertain to the soul aspect. So from the get-go, I like to educate you guys on some of like dimensional tiering and why a soul being ninth dimensional is really not it. And mass is the real important part about this like spatial structures, right? So the reason why an object with mass gaining an extra axis makes it inaccessibly bigger or more powerful is because essentially once it gains this extra axis, the object with lesser axis becomes essentially flat or non-existent from the perspective of the other one. The other one basically gains inaccessible weight because it literally exists more than the other one in a physical sense. Now, the reason why this is relevant is because souls, dreams, memories are not physical things. They're not tangible. You might say you can have a ghost shaped in ninth dimensions, but this is actually not that important or impressive whatsoever because a ghost usually has no mass. And without mass, it gaining an extra axis is actually irrelevant. It wouldn't make it more powerful. Hell, you can't even argue that a ghost with ninth dimensional axis would even be more potent than a three-dimensional ghost. Because dimensionality, it's only relevant in that sense when we're talking about physical things. Getting away from the mathematical and physical aspect of what about the scan itself? What about like the different interpretations you could give it? Because people who say this is ninth dimensional in the mathematical sense immediately have to assume that this is referring to mathematical dimensions. But what if it's actually, let's think about this for a second, right? What is another thing that this could actually be talking about?
I wonder, what could it be talking about, can you?
I'm glad you asked that, Kev, because you can also just interpret it as talking about spiritual dimensions, mental dimensions, or any other kind of non-physical thing, since it is referenced in the Eightfold Path, and which usually pertains to Buddhism. And if you look it up, it actually aligns pretty well with the context of spirituality, memories, among other non-physical things. So it likely is just referring to other non-physical dimensions or spiritual dimensions. This Eightfold Path thing could just be a non-physical transcendence to a higher plane, which is really unquantifiable in that sense. And if it is a mathematical or spatial, it's really not relevant for scaling or AP whatsoever. The immeasurable speed scans one is actually translated. Really doesn't help the argument really that well. And it's actually kind of weird to think about because it reads, as a demon lord with more power than his hunters, his speed is faster than theirs, allowing him to travel and bypass the dimensional axis of the time stream. So if you count on that part, you can actually notice that it really doesn't make any sense when you're talking about time, which is inherently a non-physical entity. We use time to measure physical change on the physical world by measuring in minutes, seconds, things like that. But when have you heard of time being a dimensional axis? First of all, it being dimensional axis implies it's an actual direction in space, which is not consistent whatsoever with the definition of time or what time is. You can say time is a temporal dimension. That doesn't make it physical. But it being a dimensional axis itself implies it has physicality to it, which is really contradictory to the definition of time. At most, this is probably inaccessible anyways, or something of that sort. But I wouldn't even grant that, given how this scan is practically dismissing like the fundamentals of time itself, and calling it like a physical axis or a dimensional axis of any kind, which at this point wouldn't even qualify for immeasurable speed given its properties.
Yeah, you can't even say it's like a non-physical axis as well. Like the scan says dimensional axis.
Dimensional axis.
So you can't even argue it's like hypothetically like a non-physical axis of time or something. You can't even argue that.
The fact that it is an axis and it's a dimensional axis makes it physical purely.
Yeah, which is just contradictory towards like what time is. And if time is physical within DMC, would that make it immeasurable? Question mark. So yeah, that's pretty much all we got for. Are you still recording, by the way?
Oh yeah, I'm still going.
Yeah, he doesn't stop.
Oh, I thought he stopped. Okay, there we go. All right, so yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Again, I'm that guy Kev on YouTube. On TikTok, I'm pretty much just named Kevy. Chador will post the link in his description. Hopefully, please do that. He'll show it on screen as well. Damn, unfortunate. Yeah, and go ahead and like mention yourself, Kenny.
Yeah, and I am the sexy man Kenny. You can know me on TikTok via Ken Omega. I usually upload regular Ragnarok content, but I'm gonna try to upload some Lucasian content as well. I hope you guys like that too. So, see you guys later.